Okay, so this is video 2 of a catch-up video for any students who are out of school, out of in-person school on Tuesday, March 9th. Here is your U.S. Constitution, which you should have already downloaded from Schoology to your Notability. As I mentioned before, you need to have the ability to highlight in Notability and also take notes in the side margins and all over this document, whether that be typing or handwriting. But the first thing I want to do right here on the cover of the U.S. Constitution is understand the difference between the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which we already studied. The Declaration of Independence was one page. It was a breakup letter of epic proportions to the king, which essentially started a war. The Constitution is not that. The Constitution is something much, much more major than the Declaration of Independence, even though they are both important with their purpose. Now that we were winning the war, we decided now that we're going to have our own country, we better figure out how to run it. And so we came up with a system of government called the Articles of Confederation, which was your remote learning a couple weeks ago. But those didn't work. And after 6 years, we needed something new. So the Founding Fathers got together at a constitutional convention and drew up our new government. So what the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So I would like you to add that right here by the Constitution. This is it. There's nothing more powerful in our country than the United States Constitution. It's more powerful than any person, any building, any political party, any city, any flag, anything. Nothing is stronger than the United States Constitution, and nothing has been stronger than the United States Constitution for the 232 years since we became the United States. The other thing I want you to understand is this is not a letter. It's not just any sort of document. This is more of a rule book or an owner's manual for our country. All right, it lays out how our country is to be run, how it changes, how it doesn't change. It is the supreme laws. There's no laws that can be made in any state, county, region, town that can ever overrule the rules in this Constitution. This is the final say. Okay, so I want you to add that this is the owner's manual and rule book for our country. Okay. Now, the other thing that you would have been given on Tuesday to coincide with this is this little visual sheet. Okay? When we decided to form our own government, we didn't want a government where there's just one person with total power and with total say. That's what we fought against. That was the King of England. We fought a war over that and we won. So when we sat down and developed our new government, if we're going to have our own government, we want there to be shared power. And so we have that through the 3 branches of our government. So our first branch, number 1, is the legislative branch. The word legislate means to make laws. So this is the lawmaking branch of our government. You have a picture of the United States Capitol here. And the legislative branch is also called Congress, and it's split up into 2 houses. This is what we're going to be talking about the majority of the day. The first one's called the House of Representatives, which is on this side of the building. And we have the Senate, which is on this side of the building. These are people that we elect from Vermont and all the other states to go to Washington, D.C. to represent us and to make laws that are the best for the public good. The second branch is the executive branch. This is the office of the president. It has a picture of the White House. Here's the president, here's the vice president, and there's a bunch of people that work in the office of the president. But the president does not make the laws. The legislative branch makes the laws. The president can influence the laws and express what laws he or she would like to get passed, and they do have some other powers that we'll go over, but the president does not make the laws. That's a common misconception people have. When they say, oh, I'm not going to vote for this person because he or she, they're going to make this law, or they're going to take away our guns, or they're going to build this wall, or they're going to do that. And a lot of that is a bunch of baloney. A lot of it's a lot of political banter and propaganda, when really it's the legislative branch that technically determines what laws get created in this country. Okay? But as far as power per one person, the president probably has the most power out of any one individual in our government, but he or she does not have supreme power. We also have the judicial branch. That's the United States Supreme Court, and there are 9 justices or big-time judges on the Supreme Court. There's no court more powerful in our country than the Supreme Court. When they make a ruling, when they rule on a case, that kind of becomes the way that that law is viewed for the future, until maybe there's another case that overrules that in the future. Those are called precedents, not presidents. Okay, so I'll give you an example. About 125 years ago, there was a famous Supreme Court ruling in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, where they ruled that people of different races, mainly African Americans and white Americans, could be separated in schools and that they did not have to go to school together as long as they were receiving an equal education. Well, that meant equal schoolhouses, equal books, equal teachers, equal salaries, equal school lunch, equal supplies, and that just wasn't happening and it wasn't realistic. So later on in the future, about 50 years later, there was a new case called Brown versus Board of Education, and they ruled that separate was not equal anymore and that you had to integrate students of all races into schools in order for people to receive an equal education. So the new ruling overruled the old ruling, and that is why you cannot separate in schools or really anywhere due to race. Okay, so this is a sheet that you would keep in your binder that we're going to refer to throughout this unit, and we're going to refer to today somewhat during this lesson. So I'm going to put it to the side for now. But before I do, I just want you to notice I've numbered them 1, 2, and 3. That's not because this one's the most important or the most powerful. They all have equal powers because they all have certain powers over each other. All right, so no one branch is more powerful than the others. Okay, and I numbered them 1, 2, 3, and you'll see why in a second. So as we dive into our Constitution, on notability, here's what I'd like you to do. So we're just going to go through this one at a time. So before you get to Article 1, which is the start of the second paragraph, you will notice as you scroll through the Constitution that there are articles and sections, and they're all labeled for you, okay? So this is arranged like an owner's manual, as I mentioned before, okay? But there are 7 articles in the Constitution, 7. The first one's the longest, and then the second one and third one are kind of the second and third longest. But the first 3, 1, 2, 3, are the longest, and then 4, 5, 6, 7 are really short. And the reason for that is the first 3 articles, you guessed it, outline the 3 branches of our government. The first article talks about all the rules of the legislative branch. Second one, executive. Third article, judicial. And then 4, 5, 6, 7 is something else. We'll worry about that later. But before we get into the articles and what they do, the opening paragraph is called the Preamble. Okay? We learned that the opening section of the Declaration of Independence was called the Preamble. It's an opening paragraph before we really get into the meat and potatoes of the document. So the Preamble states the 6 reasons why writing this Constitution was necessary. And so it says, we the people of the United States, we're doing this in order to form a more perfect union. There's 1, we want to make this country better. 2, establish justice. We want to make this country fair. 3, ensure domestic tranquility. That means make this country peaceful. 4, provide for the common defense. That means make this country protected. 5, promote the general welfare. That means make this country full of people who are happy to live here. 6, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That means make this country free for us, for everybody, and our posterity, meaning our future generations, our children, our children's children, etc. So the Preamble is the 6 reasons why the Constitution is necessary. So what you should be doing in Notability, and you can pause this video at any time, is highlight these, what I highlighted, and also jot down the notes that I have. And you can either write or type in those bubbles. And you can pause at any time if I'm going too fast during the video. Article 1, as I mentioned before, is called the legislative branch. Okay? So, here's what that means. Legislative means lawmaking. And it says all legislative powers, meaning all lawmaking powers, are given to something called Congress, which is our nickname for the legislative branch. It's what we call it. And our Congress consists of a Senate and a House of Representatives. So, the lawmaking branch is Congress. And our Congress is something called bicameral, which is a Latin word for two houses. We have two houses in our Congress. One is called the House of Representatives. One is called the Senate. This is illustrated on your picture page. Legislative branch, the lawmaking branch is called Congress, and there are two houses, House of Representatives and the Senate. As we continue, we're going to talk about the House of Representatives first. The House of Representatives shall be chosen every second year by the people. That means this is a 2-year job. And you are elected by vote. So every 2 years in Vermont, we choose who our representative that we're sending to Washington, D.C. is going to be. Currently, that person's name is Peter Welch. Okay. He is our representative from Vermont, and every 2 years, if he wishes to keep that job, he has to run for re-election and get voted back in by the people of Vermont. The requirements to be eligible to be a representative is you have to be at least 25 years old. You have to have been a citizen of the United States for at least 7 years. And you have to live in the state where you are, well, that you are representing. Okay, so Peter Welch has to be from Vermont. He has to have been a citizen for 7 years. He has to be at least 25 years old. So this is greater than or equal to 25 years old. Those are the requirements to run and become a representative. Okay, next paragraph. So the representatives shall be apportioned, that means spread out among the several states in this country. Remember, originally there was 13, and then, now we have 50. According to their respective numbers. That means how many people they have in the state, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons. I want to stop you right there. Why is it that we have to say free persons? Well, this document was written in 1789, and slavery was something that existed in this country at that time. So let's go over here for a second. There are 435 members currently in the House of Representatives, okay? And that is based on your state's population. So the more people you have in your state, the more representation you have. And how do we figure out how many people are in each state? Well, we have something called the United States Census. Every 10 years, all right, and we had one in 2020. They do a big data study, how many people live in your house, how many boys, how many girls, how many people live in your town, county, state. And from all those numbers, they can use that math to project the rate at which we are growing or declining. And that's how they kind of measure our population and figure out what our population estimated would be in 2021, 2022, etc. So every state has a minimum of one. So all the states with the smallest populations get one representative no matter what. Vermont has the minimum. As you know from your population studies earlier this year, Vermont is the second least populated state. It is the 49th most populated state. So we only have one representative. Your population determines how many reps your state has. And back when they were coming up with this plan, it was Virginia that came up with this plan Back when there was only 13 states, Virginia was kind of the main state/colony. It was the biggest, it was the most populated, it was the oldest. It had people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson were from there. And their plan was, our state has the most people, it has the most Americans in it, it should have the biggest chunk of the say. So, the amount of representatives you have should be based on how many people you have. And that's a logical plan, and I understand that. But obviously, some states didn't like that because they had less people. All right? So, speaking of less people, let's go back to the highlights. Not just free persons, but including those bound to service. That means slaves. All right? If you're bound to service for a term of years, that means slaves. But we do not count Indians that are not taxed. We are counting these people as 3/5 of all other persons. So I'm drawing an arrow down here. And this is known as the 3/5 compromise. What that means is that the southern states that had slaves, the Carolinas, Georgia, etc., said, we know we don't have as many people as the northern states, but we still want fair representation. So we want our slaves to be counted in the population count to figure out how many reps we have. We don't want them to have a say. We don't want our slaves to have a say. Don't be crazy here. But we want them to count for purposes of population. The northern states argued against that, saying, well, if you're not going to count them, their vote, why should they count as people in population for this purpose? And so they came to a compromise, and it's called the 3/5 compromise, where they ruled that slaves at this time would count as 3/5 of a person for purposes of population, for purposes of figuring out how many reps the southern states would have. So if you had 5 slaves, they counted as 3 people. If you had 50 slaves, they counted as 30 people. Now, obviously, this is part of our Constitution, which is outdated because there's no slavery in our country. Okay? The 13th Amendment, which comes later, abolishes slavery. So certain parts, certain text of our Constitution is outdated because it was written in 1789. But that doesn't mean we go in and just white it out or cross it out. It's still there for all time. But text later, an amendment, an addition, or change to the Constitution cancels out certain old language from our Constitution. And obviously the 3/5 compromise is no longer valid because there is no slavery. Now, we're almost done for today, and we're skipping on. We're going to skip this stuff for now, but we'll come back to it in your remote learning. The next house we're going to talk about is the other house. It is the Senate. It is different, okay? In the Senate, you get 2 senators from each state, and you have the job for 6 years. So when they were making that plan, this was called the New Jersey plan. New Jersey was a smaller state, and they argued, hey, population shouldn't matter. We are a United States. We are a team. A state counts as a state. Every state should be counted as equal. So in this house, every state gets 2 senators. Doesn't matter how big or small your state is. Vermont has 2. New York has 2. New Jersey has 2. Nebraska has 2. North Dakota has 2. California has 2. Texas has 2. Oklahoma has 2, etc. They all have 2. And here's some good math for you. We currently have 50 states. There's 2 from each state, so right now there's 100 senators in the Senate. It is a 6-year job, while the House was only a 2-year job. The last note to make up for Tuesday is the age requirements. They're a little bit different. In the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old. You have to have been a citizen for 9 years of the United States, while the House is only 7 as a requirement. And once again, you have to live in the state that you represent. All right, so greater than or equal to 30 years old. Okay, so that is what you would have missed in Constitution notes on Tuesday. And once you have those down, you are ready to begin your remote learning for the week. And once you complete that, you are all caught up when I see you on Monday.